yeah, let's go ahead and read our book and everything. Again, we're kind of working through a little bit now. It's, philosophy and everything, which is always inherently a little bit up its own ass. But we're reading 77 Modern Ethics in 77 Arguments. It's just kind of a collection of various ideas. And the subject matter, the title of what we're reading today is called Why Life is Absurd. So let's just go ahead and read that. A consideration of time, space, relativity, meaning, and absurdity. Yep, all of it. Relativity, number one. Goes into a kind of what I assume is a I don't know, what is this? It's like a interview sort of thing or something. Professor Einstein said, "In the world there is time, and just as there is time, there is another thing: space. Space and time. Time and space. And these two things," he said, "are relative. Do you know what relative means?" Another guy says, "No. The point? Continue." "There is no person these days who doesn't know what relative means. I will explain it to you with an analogy, and soon you will also know. Relativity is like this. If you have 7 hairs on your head, it's very few, but if you have 7 hairs in your milk, it's very many." It's pretty funny. That's from a comedy routine. From a Yiddish comedy duo, I guess. It's true. I don't want any hair in my milk. In the 1870s, Leo Tolstoy became depressed about life's futility. He had it all, but so what? In My Confession, he wrote, "Sooner or later, there will come diseases and death. They had come already, to my dear ones and to me. And there would be nothing left but stench and worms. All my affairs, no matter what they might be, would sooner or later be forgotten, and I myself should not exist. So why should I worry about these things?" Life's brevity bothered Tolstoy so much that he resolved to adopt religious faith to connect to the infinite afterlife, even though he considered religious belief irrational and monstrous. Was Tolstoy right? Is life so short as to make a mockery of people and their purposes and to render human life absurd? In a famous 1971 paper, The Absurd, Thomas Nagel argues that life's absurdity has nothing to do with its length. If a short life is absurd, he says, a longer life would be even more absurd. Our lives are merely instants even on a geological time scale, let alone a cosmic one. We will all be dead any minute. But of course, none of these evident facts can be what makes life absurd. If it is absurd. For suppose we lived forever, would not a life that is absurd if it lasts 70 years be infinitely absurd if it lasted through eternity? Interesting. This line of reasoning has a nice ring to it, but whether lengthening an absurd thing will relieve it of its absurdity depends on why the thing is absurd and how much you lengthen it. A longer life might be less absurd, even if an infinite life would not be. A short poem that is absurd. This is written kind of weird. A short poem that is absurd because it is written in gibberish would be even more absurd if it prattled on for longer. Okay, so the inherent nature, I guess, of something is what they're saying. They're just wording it weird. But say I decided to wear a skirt so short it could be mistaken for a belt. On my way to teach my class, a colleague intercepts me. "Your skirt," she says, "is absurd." "Absurd? Why?" I ask. "Because it's so short," she replies. "If a short skirt is absurd, a longer skirt would be even more absurd," I retort. "Now who's being absurd? The skirt is absurd because it is so short. A longer skirt would be less absurd. Why? Because it does not suffer from the feature that makes the short skirt absurd, namely a ridiculously short length. The same goes for a 1 hour hunger strike. The point of a hunger strike is to show that one feels so strongly about something that one is willing to suffer a lack of nourishment for a long time in order to make a point. If you only starve for 1 hour, you have not made your point. Your 1 hour hunger strike is absurd because it is too short. If you lengthened it to 1 month or 1 year, you might be taken more seriously. If life is absurd because it's so short, it might be less absurd if it were suitably longer. Absurdity occurs when things are so ill-fitting or so ill-suited to their purpose or situation as to be ridiculous, like wearing a clown costume to a non-circus job interview or demanding that your dog tell you what time it is. It is the lifespan of a relatively healthy and well-preserved human, say somewhere between 75 and 85, so short as to render it absurd, ill-suited to reasonable human purposes? So short as to render it absurd. Okay, let me read this a little bit more carefully so I can try to understand it. And I guess talk about it. Is the lifespan of a relatively healthy and well-preserved human ill-suited to reasonable human purposes? I guess I kind of get what they're saying here. With it being, they're essentially kind of, I think they're just kind of pontificating on the nature of absurdity in relativity to time, I suppose. I don't know exactly what their point is. Which is why I'm trying to read a little bit more carefully. Is the lifespan of a relatively healthy and well-preserved human, say somewhere between 75 and 85, so short as to render it absurd, ill-suited to reasonable human purposes? They're asking the question if you would consider a human life 75 to 85 short to render it absurd, or to render life absurd, or something else. Anyways, that's not the end of the chapter. I'm just attempting to kind of uncover that. I think that, the title of this is Why Life is Absurd. So I think they're attempting to make the point that life is short, so it's a little bit, it is a little bit silly, you know? The next section is titled Time. Time as we all knew it before Einstein elaborated is relative. It flies when we are having fun. It creeps in this petty pace from day to day when we are racked with guilt. 5 minutes is too short a time to explain Einstein's theory of relativity, but is just the right length of time for that comedy duo from the beginning of this chapter to make a routine about it, or to routine about it. Our perception of time is relative to space, yes, but also to purpose. To other spans of time, to task, but also to purpose, to other spans of time, to task, and probably to other things I have not thought of. What's the book title? It's titled Modern Ethics in 77 Arguments. Our perception of time is relative to space, yes, but also to purpose, to other spans of time, and to task, and probably to other things I have not thought of. So, a lot of kind of the idea of what they're saying here seems to be that time is in direct relation to the value, the amount of importance that we potentially put upon things. If we were to say that absurdity is, I don't know, a lack of importance? What is the definition of absurdity? because obviously we can kind of hear it immediately and think of something, but the quality or state of being ridiculous or wildly unreasonable. So like me whenever I'm playing Mysterium. To assess whether human life is usually too short, consider human aims and purposes. People are commonly thought to have two central concerns, love and work. So much has been written about how little time there is to do both, that we need not elaborate. Suffice it to say that when people ask me how I manage to be a philosopher, mother, teacher, wife, writer, etc., the answer is obvious, by doing everything badly. We could abandon love or abandon work, but giving up one fundamental human pursuit in order to have time for a better shot at the other leaves us with, at best, half a life. And even half a life is not really accessible to most of us. Life is too short for work alone. By the time we have an inkling about what sort of work we might enjoy and do well, most of us have little time to do it. By the time we figure anything out, we are already losing our minds. Age-related cognitive decline begins in our 20s, just as our prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for judgment, is finally completing its lengthy maturation process. The rate of cognitive decline increases as we age, with a steep increase after age 60. We don't fare much better with time to love. It takes time and experience to develop the wisdom and maturity to choose an appropriate partner and love him or her in a way that doesn't make everyone miserable. Relationships need attention, and attention takes time. Children take a lot of attention too, and some reflection and experience. Yet we are biologically made to bear children when we are young and unwise. Maybe the problem is not that we don't have enough time, but that we waste the time that we have. Seneca famously thought this: it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Most of us seem unable to refrain from wasting time. It is the rare person indeed who can be maximally efficient and productive. For the rest of us, that is, for almost all of us, Seneca's advice about not wasting time seems true but useless. If we devoted our entire lives to one great painting or one beautiful melody, even if that work was a masterpiece, we might feel absurd to have spent our entire lives on it. A life so spent is bound to have been narrow, confining, and oddly obsessive. That doesn't seem to be a reasonable way to spend one's entire life. It seems out of scale. But if life were much longer, we might have enough time to write many books, paint many paintings, compose many melodies, and over a couple of 100 years or so, get really good at it. We might even feel fulfilled, accomplished, and decidedly not absurd. Maybe not. But we would have more of a chance to do than we do now in our fleeting, ludicrous, minute lifespan. What if we lived for, say, 500 or 1,000 years? Would our ambition tend to grow and to scale, making life seem absurdly short for human purposes, whatever its length? Is it human nature to adopt outsized ambitions, condemning ourselves to absurdity by having conceptions of reasonable achievement that we don't have time to realize? Why haven't we scaled down our ambitions to fit the time we have? Is the problem our nature or our lifespan? That was a thought that I was having in regards to this, that potentially, it's all about perspective, right? Like if we did live 500 or 1,000 years, we might just still feel similarly about the brevity of life and everything in some ways. In some ways, life doesn't feel brief at all, but that's a counterpoint to their point that they're making. There may be no way to be sure, but consider the fact that although we have ambitions unsuited to our lifespan, we don't seem to consistently adopt ambitions unsuited to our species in respects other than time. It is not absurd to us that we cannot fly or hibernate. We don't think the fact that we can hold our breath for minutes rather than hours, or memorize a few pages rather than a tome makes human life meaningless. We don't find that our inability to read each other's minds, speak to animals, glow in the dark, run 60 miles an hour, solve complex occasions in our head simultaneously, or lift 1,000-pound weights makes a sad mockery of human experience. This makes it more likely that, given a longer lifespan, life might seem less absurdly short for our purposes. Just as a lifespan can be too short It can be too long. For many, it is far too long already. Many people are bored with life, irritated by the human condition, exhausted from suffering, tired of living. For those whom life is too long, a longer life would be worse, and quite possibly more absurd. For some, however, life seems too long because it's too short, meaning life is rendered so absurd by being short that even a short, absurd life feels too long because it is pointless. A life made absurd because it is too short would be rendered less absurd if it were significantly longer. A million-year or infinite life might be too long for human nature and purposes too. Though such a life would be so radically different that we can only speculate, an infinite life might become tedious, and people world-weary. Lifetime love commitments, a source of meaning, now would likely cease to exist. A million-year or infinite lifespan might be too long and slip into an absurdity. To everything, its time. Both too short a lifespan and too long a lifespan present absurdist challenges to a meaningful life. For a 500 or 1,000-year lifespan to work to reduce life's absurdity, we would have to be able to sustain a sense of self over that time, so long that our memories function well and our psychological continuity can be maintained. Our sense of identity might hold up, at least to a degree, not all that different from our current condition. There is also the matter of perception. As we age, time seems to pass more quickly, probably because we've become accustomed to life and pay less attention. If life were much longer, we would have to find a way to notice so that it didn't seem to pass in a flash in our inattention. And then there's our health. Clearly, it will not be less absurd to lengthen our period of decrepitude, which is a new sort of word that I'm going to look up. Decrepitude. The state of being decrepit, for a more accurate definition of that is being worn out or ruined because of age or neglect, or elderly and infirm is what the definition of that is. Clearly, it will not be less absurd to lengthen our period of decrepitude, lengthen our period of potential health complications because of age and all of that. The longer lifespan would have to be mostly spent in decent health. An appropriately lengthened lifespan might make life much less absurd. That's the end of that section. The next section is titled Space. In the scheme of things, humans take up very little space. The Earth is a minuscule part of the universe, and each individual takes up so little space on this minuscule part of the universe as to occupy almost no space at all. Relative to the entire universe, or even to the planet Earth, our physical smallness relative to Earth and to the universe is taken by some to imply insignificance, and in turn, our absurdity. But absurdity occurs where things are ill-suited to their purposes, and neither human size nor the space allotted to humans is ill-suited to human purposes. Unlike the time of a human lifespan, which is ill-suited to our purposes, the space allotted to humans isn't. We're neither too small nor too large to do what we want to do. We are not forced to live in cramped and tiny caves. We are not so light as to be blown around by the wind. If we had to stand on each other's backs to reach the leaves that we needed for sustenance, that might make us feel absurdly small, but we'd probably adapt to accommodate this feature of our physiology or build ladders for easier foraging. If the atmosphere thinned out at 4 feet, we might feel absurdly large. Crawling thinned out at 4 feet, so like, you know, as we get here, atmosphere, you know, like torso level atmosphere. If the atmosphere thinned out at 4 feet, we might feel absurdly large, crawling awkwardly on our bellies in order to breathe. Yet if we were belly crawlers, that would seem normal to us, and our bodies would adapt to crawling. We have evolved and adapted to our space, both to the space we take up and to the space available to us. Space is more manipulable than time. We build chairs and tables to human size. We blast through mountains to clear space for roads. We build living space horizontally and vertically so that we can live in densely populated cities. To some extent, we've conquered space by increasing the speed of human travel and developing technologies to enable us to communicate easily across great distances. We conquered space, guys. We fucking did it. This stream conquered space. This has made my life more convenient, but not less absurd because of the absurdity of human life is not a space problem. Given enough time, we could cover more space, but more space will not solve our time-related difficulties. People have spatial needs, but given that we can manipulate or adapt to our spatial parameters, our size and the space we have to live in do not seem crucial to our sense of ourselves. Very short lives seem incomplete, even tragic, but we don't have comparable views about people who are very large or very small. So who cares if we are small? That's an idiosyncrasy. I'm going to look up that word. Idiosyncrasy. A mode of behavior or way of thought that is peculiar to an individual. But the bugs. Cities suck. I want to live near nature. It's different. It's a different sort of thing for everybody. I think I'm similarly, but I also like cities to a degree. It can help with the innate fear of human extinction to be located at least in some close proximity to other people, right? But everybody's got a whole spectrum of preference on regards to that. A mode of behavior or way of thought that is peculiar for an individual, idiosyncrasy. Very short lives seem incomplete, even tragic, but we don't have comparable views about people who are very large or very small. So who cares if we are small? That is an idiosyncrasy, if you care to note it. It does not entail our insignificance. The fact that we're minuscule relative to the vast universe is not a way of showing that our relationship to space makes our lives absurd. It's just a long way of saying that we are small. Small is a relative term, and this is a long way of saying we are small. And this long way of saying we are small specifies what we are small in relation to. Our size does not matter. Wish my wife felt the same way. The English poet Andrew Marvell, in his famous poem To His Coy Mistress, begins his request for seizing the day for love by saying that if he could, he would wait and woo far longer before going at it. Had we but world enough and time, this coyness lady were no crime. Marvell was right about time, but wrong about the world. We have too little time, but the world's aplenty. That's true. I mean, can't do everything in the world. And, time changes the world too. So, we're in the next section, titled Meaning. The absurdity of human life poses a challenge to its meaning. Absurdity and meaningfulness don't go together. This, however, does not mean that if life were not absurd, then it would have meaning. Removing the obstacle of absurdity does not entail that meaning rushes in. But if we cannot remove the obstacle of absurdity, then it will be hard to conclude that life has meaning or determine what that meaning might be. The clown suit is standing in our way. And that's the end of that chapter. I kind of want to reread through that. Removing the obstacle of absurdity does not entail that meaning rushes in. But if we cannot remove the obstacle of absurdity, then it will be hard to conclude that life has meaning or determine what that meaning might be. So, kind of, I think maybe what they're saying there is that meaning and absurdity don't go super well together, but they're not fully opposites. But they are kind of fully opposites. because, I mean, they're not really fully opposite. I guess they're related in an interesting way, right? If we cannot remove the obstacle of absurdity, then it will be hard to conclude that life has meaning or determine what that meaning might be. It can be hard to see meaning in life if you cannot remove the obstacle that is absurdity. But the very act of removing the obstacle of absurdity in and of itself doesn't give you meaning, I suppose. That you can believe that life is absurd and that is going to be a challenge that you might have to grapple with. But that meaning might need to be more than just the eradication of absurdity. There needs to be something behind the absurdity driving you to get rid of the absurdity, I guess. And can you really define absurdity? Isn't that suggestive to people? Well, I mean, you can define it. You know, it's Google will tell you what it is. But I do agree. I mean, like, a lot of this is based fully in perception, you know? The space thing was interesting because obviously, I mean, something in regards to space, the vastness of everything can feel overwhelming to the point where potentially you could have the feeling and the sensation that how big everything is relative to us makes us absurd. That we are absurd inherently because we are so small compared to the planet or even beyond that, the cosmic scale. But it was interesting. I liked what they had to say about, like, kind of how we have conquered space a little bit. That, like, there are so many things that we can do now that we weren't able to do previously. That, like, I can be talking to you guys from fucking Denver, Colorado, while you're wherever you are, and we're exchanging ideas. That's I mean that is kind of like conquering the space problem, but also that, you know, our limiting factor is more time than space. There's a world of, we have too little time, but there's a world of plenty, you know. To his coy mistress, he said that he would wait to woo far longer before going at it. I mean, that's an interesting thing too, you know, obviously, like, with the idea of if we lived longer and everything, how we might approach our work and our love, which our pursuit of work and love in whatever form that is. It doesn't need to be romantic or sexual or whatever. But that potentially we might find other things to work on, you know, that we might be like, I'm going to work on this for a while, and then I'm going to work on this. I mean, people already do that, you know. You're watching as a lot of people stop, you know, being a content creator now to focus on something else, or just focus on life, to maybe pursue the love where they feel they've only pursued the work for a while. I mean, I think it's interesting in the terms of content creation because obviously I find a lot of the love that I receive in life, a lot of my sought after love is received from people that I work with, you know, I'll talk to you guys, and that the love expressed there uh, fuels me, and then also the friendship love, you know, the friends that I talk to and stuff like that from day to day. And then, you know, the idea of like maybe thinking like that your life is absurd because you're not trying to fill your purpose towards one incredible product, you know, such as a song or a painting or something like that, that you could dedicate your life entirely to one thing. That lends itself to absurdity and kind of you know, it has an interesting contrast to, I guess, like also the idea of working on many things could maybe feel absurd as well. You know, it's some pretty interesting sort of ideas. Life feels short, but life can feel long. I mean, they ended up kind of mentioning that. I, you know, wish that you know, obviously I'm here for more of a positive sort of environment whenever I come to stream and everything. So, you know, like on that point, I can maybe wish that there was a little bit more of a positive spin on the I guess talking about how for a lot of people life can feel too long, and what I can say about that, because it's a true thing, you know, I don't even think that necessarily they came at it from a point of negativity, but that they came at it from kind of just a point of just to reference to it, that people do feel that way. And I can, you know, I can say that that's a sometimes it can be an on again off again sort of thing, and it can be on again for a while and it can be off again for a while, you know. And you know, I could say like over the past you know, like year and a half, 2 years, that that maybe I was also of that kind of take, like, god damn, life is fucking too long. But it's also too short, and you come to kind of accept both things at different times. I think there was the last chapter of this that was against invulnerability, that brought up the ideas of kind of allowing yourself to be vulnerable to things and to that sensation as well. And I think that's smart too. 15 years of depression, it's almost like time dilation. It does get to that point, for sure. I mean, I feel that. You know, I was watching the 9 years video that I made on my main channel last year, and it's 3 minutes and like 50 seconds of just me feeling bad about life. I didn't have a single good thing to say about that year, and that's just not entirely accurate to what it was. It was a hard year. I was in a bad place, and I had a lot more bad to come after that point, you know, talking from the 2024 in January. I had a tough road ahead of me in February of 2023. There was a lot more that was gonna hit me, and I was already at that point in that video where I had nothing good to say about the entire year. And I look on it now from a point where I've been in therapy for a bit longer, and I've been able to talk about things, and I've gotten bored. That's something that can be too much. Boredom can be bad, maybe, but I think like no boredom at all is also equally bad. And I got bored in a good way, you know? So I look back on some of those things that I said a year ago, and I feel I look at that and I think my feelings in those moments were valid, and I can recognize that, and I can go back to that place in my thinking. I know where I was in my head then, because it was recent enough that it's not forgotten to me. But it's slowly being forgotten. And so much can be said about just the phrase, just keep beating down the line, you know? The shit can get tough. But, you know, time really, it's corny, but time really does fucking heal all wounds. You know, new wounds can come about and all that, but with time, at the very least, the things that you've been through will scar over, and they'll be there. They happen to you. It's your life. But if you could take on a kind of radical acceptance of the things that have happened to you, it is a much easier path than to continue down a road of denial in some way, being the opposite, the flip side of the coin to acceptance, right? Acceptance doesn't have to be a great feeling thing, but I think it's better than denial. You know, if you can live under that radical acceptance, then it helps not to convince yourself of delusions. Of course, it's hard to get into that whenever you believe in the validity of perspective. It starts to kind of coil in upon itself, and then you can go on for a good bit. That's why we read books like this, so that we can think about this stuff, because it's probably already in our noggin anyway, because we're already probably thinking about some of these things, right? And if we can expose ourselves to each other's ideas, and I can read what you guys have to say, and I don't know, occasionally I'll have something to say, then that can be a comforting thing to see that there is a human condition, and it's not always the best thing, but it can be a very comforting thing a lot of the time. Taco Bell. The cheesy gordito crunch is back in action. Back again from 1962. Did you know that? Did you know that the cheesy gordito crunch is older than you and your parents? Maybe don't put the ideals of anybody born before the cheesy gordito crunch up on a pedestal. These were taken from the New York Times. They had a weekly, I think, was it weekly? I don't know. It was some philosophy series that was in the New York Times for a good while. I don't know if they still have it in it. But this is just kind of a collection of various thoughts and everything. And this one is titled Against Invulnerability. So probably the idea of I'm imagining just like putting your emotions aside or something. I don't know. Let's read it. Like many of us, I am often troubled. I am distressed by my failure to be more than I am, a better philosopher, a better family member, a better person. And I know that if I could take a little more distance on the daily goings on in my world that trouble me, I probably would be better in many ways, if not all these ways. This knowledge leads me to think that these philosophies that counsel rising above the things that disturb me so, that I may arrive to a tranquil state of mind. Philosophies like Buddhism, Stoicism, Taoism, and possibly Epicureanism, an ancient philosophy, not its modern association with pleasures of the flesh. I think Epicureanism was the idea that you should live your life to seek pleasure. Its modern association probably being tied more to sex and whatnot. All of those philosophies offer different ways of achieving such a tranquil state, and so they are tempting. I believe, however, that for most of us, they are a false, if beguiling, path. Buddhism, at least in its official doctrine, argues that if we abandon our desires by coming to understand the true nature of the cosmos and follow the Noble Eightfold Path, the end of suffering will follow. Stoicism, similarly, but distinctly, counsels that we rid ourselves of emotions, and similarly, but again distinctly, offers a path of recognition in our place in the universe to help us get there. I do not wish to claim that either or both of these related doctrines are mistaken. Instead, I want to say that most of us, when we really reflect upon our lives, would not want what is officially on offer, but instead something else. In their official guide, these doctrines are examples of what I am going to label invulnerabilism. They say that we can, and that we should, make ourselves immune to the world's vicissitudes. I assume that's the bad shit in the world. New word. Vicissitudes? Vicissitudes? Let me Google it. You could play a fart noise at any time, and it'll be the funniest fart noise played all stream. This is how you spell it. Vicissitudes. A change of circumstance or fortune, typically one that is unwelcome or unpleasant. So, the bad things in life. Whenever the domino effect of life hits in a bad way. What is central to the invulnerabilist views is the belief that we can extricate ourselves from the world's contingencies so that they do not affect us, that we can remove the world's troubles, basically, I guess. We are capable of making ourselves immune to the fortunes of our bodies, our thoughts, and our environment, and we will live better or happier or more pure lives if we do so. Whether the task involves the abolition of desire, the elimination of emotion, or the recognition of the ultimate oneness of all things, the guiding idea is that we can and ought to make ourselves invulnerable to the world's vagaries. Probably a synonym of vicissitudes. For invulnerabilist views, what matters is only the present. After all, as they argue, the present is all there is, and therefore the only thing we can have an effect upon. Moreover, we can only be assured of having an effect upon ourselves in the present. Our effects upon the world are always uncertain. The task of invulnerabilism, then, is for us to inhabit the present fully and without reserve, letting go of the grip of our past and our desires for the future. Only if we do this can we render ourselves immune to the predations of our psychological tendencies tied up with hope, regret, expectation, and mourning. Invulnerabilism recommends that we secrete a distance between ourselves and the world so that it ultimately cannot touch us. The extremity of such a view can be illustrated by reference to the Stoics' ratification of the ancient philosophers Anaxagoras's, who knows who that is, reported remark upon hearing of his son's death. I always knew that my child was immortal. That was the quote that Anaxagoras said in regards to hearing of his son's death. It is possible, perhaps, that some few among us can reach this degree of distance from the world. But the question is, do we want it? I suspect that I am not alone in thinking that the death of one of my children should shatter me, even if it should not ultimately destroy me. Most of us want to feel caught up in the world. We want to feel gripped by what we do and those we care about, involved with them, taken up by them. The price of this involvement is our vulnerability. We must stand prepared to feel the loss of what we care about, because that is part of what it means to care. Caring requires desiring for the sake of others, which in an uncertain world entails that desiring can be frustrating. There are those who will argue that doctrines like Buddhism do not actually embrace the invulnerabilism I have saddled them with here. There are many Buddhists who feel the world deeply, and in particular are deeply compassionate about others. This is certainly true. I have in my life known two people I would call wise. One described himself as a Buddhist, and the other as a Taoist. And both of them made themselves vulnerable to the world. I don't really know a whole lot about Taoism. Taoism is an interesting ideology. I don't know how much you guys know. Hey, I'm reading about philosophy. And both of them made themselves vulnerable to the world, and especially to those around them. So what am I arguing here? I am arguing that even many people who describe themselves or their goals as in invulnerabilist terms do not actually live or seek to live that way. The official doctrines, the ones that can offer ultimate peace with oneself, a place of stillness that cannot be shaken, are in most cases a misrepresentation of what people are like or even what they want. Instead, something else is happening. Something that involves some of the insights of invulnerabilist doctrines, but does not embrace them in what I'm calling their official form. As far as I can tell, the way to think about these things has less to do with the invulnerability promoted by the official doctrines, and more to do, one might say, using these doctrines to take the edge off of invulnerability, to allow one to experience life without becoming overwhelmed or depressed or resentful or bitter, except perhaps at the extremity of loss. There is some combination of embedding oneself in the world in a vulnerable way and not being completely undone by that vulnerability that is pointed at, if not directly endorsed by the official doctrines. It seems to me that Taoism, Buddhism, Stoicism, etc. work not only by making one invulnerable, but rather by allowing one to step back from the immediacy of the situation so that the experience of pain or suffering is seen for what it is, precisely as a part of a contingent process, a process that could have yielded a very different present, but just happened to yield this one. This, of course, is not the official doctrine either, especially for Stoicism, for which the unfolding of the cosmos is a rational one. Buddhists will periodically refer to the contingency of the cosmos unfolding, however. The concept of nirvana bends that contingency towards something nearly rational, or at least just. But it does not seem to me to capture their common insight that there is so much about the world we cannot control. Seeking to master it is an illusion. We must learn instead to live with the process in all its contingency, even where we hope to change it for the better. And we must understand that for most of us, suffering is inevitable. We can recognize all this and take solace from it without having to take the step of removing ourselves from the desires that lead to suffering. I think I'm mostly agreeing with this. I mean, it almost feels like when you're met with the extremity of like of a belief they describe as invulnerabilism, that it can balance when you're feeling very, very emotional, when you're feeling in like there's a lot of shit going on, you're starting to feel that bitter and resentment and all those emotions that we don't want to feel, like depression and all that. Of course, that is depression specifically is more of something that you can get diagnosed with. Anyway, it can feel like whenever you're on this side of the spectrum that seeing something so far over here can kind of balance you back to the middle. I am a New Yorker born and bred, and have lived largely as a foreigner for the past 2 decades in suburban South Carolina. New Yorkers, I suspect, rarely thrive for long periods outside the city, or at least some major city. Sometimes I tell myself that my life is certainly far better here than most other lives of the planet, and this is certainly true, but it rarely seems to me to be helpful in those periods where I feel in exile. Instead, it leads more to an attitude of, it's bad for almost everyone, except the lucky few. That hardly counts as wisdom, and does little comfort to me. But suppose I think of it differently. Life is contingent. The very same trajectory. What does contingent mean? It's a word that I can get in the context of something, but as a simple statement, life is contingent, I do want to look it up. Life is subject to chance, basically. That's what he's saying. Okay. Life is subject to chance. The very same trajectory that led me to South Carolina also gave me my family, my opportunity to study philosophy. Gave me the very same trajectory that led me to South Carolina also gave me my family, my opportunity to study philosophy, many of the friends I have, and much else. Now, it might be that a slightly different process would have led to a better life, in whatever sense of better one wants to use, which itself is a vexed issue. That's a weird sentence. I'm just going to move on from it. It also might have led to much worse than moving to South Carolina. The fact is, here I am with this life trajectory and these goods and ills, and there you have it. Because that is how things work. This doesn't make me immune to feeling myself a foreigner, and it doesn't imply that I should not try to improve my life or the lives of those around me, but it does give me solace that exile is not all there is to the contingency of this life, my particular life. Now apply that attitude towards a more difficult situation, that of losing a job or the end of a love relationship. It seems to me apt that these things should hurt more than the gnawing sense that one isn't at home in one's environment. In any event, I wouldn't conclude that someone who felt these losses keenly was lacking in proper insight, but perhaps knowing that the world is contingent, subject to chance, that everything comes and goes, and that we only have so much control over our lives, will help us come to terms with these losses, while not draining them of suffering, remove some of the searing character often associated with them. Of course, this will not work for every situation. I don't know how one copes with the death of a child, although people do. Nor do I think that this should be much solace to those who live under dire oppression or in grinding poverty. The cure for these latter two ills is a more just political order. True. You can't apply some of this shit to, like dire oppression or grinding poverty. But for those of us who find ourselves neither entirely blessed nor entirely bereft, there is something to be said for this perspective on the troubles that plague us. What I have argued here is that taking such a perspective is not a matter of making ourselves invulnerable to the world. There may be those who seek invulnerability, and even those who achieve it. But for the rest of us who want something other than immunity, the lessons of invulnerabilist approaches should be something other than their official doctrines. Or, to put in another way, in taking on those lessons, such as a focus on the present moment or a recognition of the contingency of things, they should be seen as exercises rather than goals. These exercises help us live with rather than overcome what we cannot control. Come to some sort of terms with what inevitability may define us. But for those who choose to remain vulnerable, life is not and cannot be undergone as anything other than a fraught trajectory, one hedged about by an inescapable contingency. and one that is likely to leave scars along its joys. And for most of us, most of the time, we would not want it to be any other way. I agree. I mean, I agree with a lot of that. I would say that fucking A, man. What I say is going to be so much less properly worded than something directly from a philosopher in a book, but we're feeling people for the most part, and we can learn a lot of lessons from those kind of doctrines, the Taoism, the Stoicism, the Epicurism, all that stuff. Epicurism is an interesting one because it's specifically to seek only the pleasures of life, but it is in concept the idea of making yourself invulnerable to the more emotionally damaging, I guess, sort of experiences, right? It makes logical sense, but it's also about emotions. You can't say that. I don't know. It's what is logical in that sense? Because obviously you can read something like Stoicism, which is purely a doctrine based entirely in the ideas of following logic and all that stuff. It's interesting. It's definitely interesting because there are moments where you're gonna get hit with that. You're gonna fucking get messed up and stuff, and you're not gonna want to feel that. Obviously, no one wants to feel their pain except the masochists, and that's usually more in a different kind of way as opposed to an emotional or character searing sort of thing. It can be more comparative to physical, though there are people who definitely might be addicted to emotional pain as well. I think there's that happy medium. This is what I'm here for. Actual wisdom for my peers. Oh, thank you, Jabel. Intelligent specimen here. I would say that, as most things are with philosophy, you can take that with a group. It's not all black and white, because obviously the sorts of things like those doctrines that apply invulnerability to your stressful situations can help a lot. I know that in some of the worst situations, some of the research that I was doing on like Buddhism and shit like that, obviously I'm reading it and I'm like, well, fuck, I can't be a god, I'm a fucking guy, like I'm reading all this stuff that it's telling me to do. These are the rules and stuff like that. But I know that I'm not a legalistic person when it comes to that. And you can attempt to be that, but even whenever you attempt to be that, like my grandfather is a very, very legalistic Christian man. There's plenty of examples that I could come up with in regards to the life that he has led that I'd be like, does that really match up with your doctrine? It's what you did because it's what you wanted to do, and you're an incredibly loyal and legal, again, like very legalistic follower, but if some of the ideas that might be brought to the table from him may be in contradiction to his doctrine. That's kind of the thing about doctrine, right? You're not gonna become Buddha. That's not gonna happen. It's a story of a guy who it's a story that becomes an example that to live by, and you can take some of those values. You can work harder to live towards those certain doctrines, but you're a person, and your vulnerability should be valued to you. right? Crazy shit. Crazy shit. All right, well, that was fun. That was like the first time we've ever really like read like through like a book and shit like that. You know, so let's do it again. I had a good time. There's 77 arguments in this thing, so maybe we'll read more. I didn't want to just keep it to that, but maybe we'll read some other shit. I don't know. Should be good. My head hurts. Don't think too hard about it, you know? You're in your present moment. You're thinking about it and everything. But, you know, these sorts of ideas could be helpful. But, you know, you can also spiral into them as well. So don't worry about it. You're chilling. Listen to some music. Kick back. Relax. Get some water. Stretch. If you've been sitting down at your computer watching the stream today. Maybe get some food in you if you're hungry or something like that. Take care of yourself. Do what you can. You're doing your best. You know, keep on beating down the line, guys. Always keep on beating down the line, brother mans. All right. I'm going to see you guys tomorrow for some games.